Hello and welcome. The listeners will just have to guess what that laughter was about. There was a double entendre involved, let me put it that way. Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the podcast that chases the money behind the beautiful game, with me, Kevin Day, and the man who does the actual chasing, often in a Benny Hill style, football finance expert at Liverpool University, Kieran Maguire. Kieran, it's questions day, but we do have a couple of 100 news stories to mention because the English football season ended and it all kicked off.
Very much so.
See what I did there? See
Very
what I did
good.
there? If there was a podcast section, if there was a podcast section in BAFTAs, it's jokes like that would get us nominated. I've got a BAFTA dilemma this morning, Kieran. Because as each year goes by, I wonder how appropriate it is for me to keep my BAFTA nomination up on the wall. Basically, there's got to be a cut-off point where it no longer becomes relevant. But anyway, firstly, Kieran, first big news story. I'm sure if there must be some kind of football finance expert accountancy award that you've got loads of. You must have hundreds on your mantelpiece, haven't you? Little bespectacled statuettes.
Well, something bizarrely this week, I became part of Wikipedia on the back of this show.
Welcome aboard.
So yes, and as you can imagine, some people have been busy editing. I mean, I had nothing to do with it, of course, but some people have been adding to make it slightly more colourful, shall we say, given issues to do with my past. Yeah,
did you go with your real birth date in the end? It's caused me actually. A mate of mine did it some time ago, and it's nice. There is a certain element of prestige, but I actually got in trouble. I got a call from the tax authority saying, "You've been lying to us about your date of birth." I said, "No, I haven't." I said, because he tried to help me out on Wikipedia by making me 15 years younger than I actually am, which is it means strangers when they meet me kind of look me up and down. Anyway, I don't know which is the biggest of the news stories, Kieran, but I think this is probably the most recent, and it's been predicted by you for 9 months, pretty much. At Sheffield Wednesday have finally been deducted those 12 points for financial misconduct, but Charlton Athletic certainly won't be happy, because if this had been done a week ago, they'd still be in the Championship.
Yeah, it does seem a slightly complex ruling by the appeals committee. So Sheffield Wednesday have been they've been charged, and they've been effectively found guilty of dates to do when Hillsborough was sold. So they put the sale through their 2018 accounts. Nothing appeared in the land registry to 2019, and that seemed to form the basis of the EFL charge. So if the sale of Hillsborough has now been excluded from the 2018 accounts, that means that Wednesday went from making a small profit of just about $2 million to a whopping great big loss. And as a consequence of that, it means that they've exceeded the £39 million 3-year limit for losses. And the maximum penalty is 12 points. So they appear to have been given the maximum penalty. They were also up on a charge of being naughty boys as well, which is called the utmost good faith ruling, which could have resulted in a further 9 points deduction by all accounts. But they've been found innocent of that, and that makes sense to me, because the EFL also charged the executives of Sheffield Wednesday with a similar charge earlier this year, and again they defended that successfully. So 12 points is the number. Charlton are, I think, grumpy is the word I would use. So they are threatening now some form of appeal, even though the claim wasn't against them, because they are going to continue to be relegated. And of course, if you drop from the Championship to League One, it works out as around about a £7 million hit in terms of TV money. So you can see why Charlton are unhappy, though who Charlton are at present, given that their ownership is up on various charges of or various accusations of not putting in money when they've claimed to do so. We will have to await on that one.
Now, in my cursory research, because as you know, there's no point two of us doing a lot of research, Kieran, because then one of us wouldn't sound surprised when these things come out. But I did look at the Sheffield Wednesday thing, and the bad faith one has the BBC referred to it as bad faith rather than you say a lack of good faith. But, so does that imply then that the appeal committee agreed that this wasn't a deliberate attempt to cover things up? It was basically an accident or bad accounting, or because it seems odd that they are found guilty of one but cleared of another when they're both so intricately linked.
Yes, I guess that what the committee has said is now that they've seen the paperwork, perhaps Sheffield Wednesday have cooperated with the committee, and that always helps in their favour. And it is an accusation. It's a pretty strong accusation against the executives and the club. So, it's the accounting, by all accounts, has been a bit muddled. The sale of Hillsborough will, in theory, now count in their 2019 accounts. So that will be a good thing for the 2019 accounts. The downside is that they're going to start season 2021 on -12. And I think this is where things do get really messy, because what would have happened had Sheffield Wednesday got as far as the playoffs? So they could be in the middle of the playoffs, and they did have a dip in form. If they'd ended up in the playoffs and then they got the 12-point deduction, you can imagine the almighty bun fight. Or they could have been promoted. So, and if they were promoted, the EFL points deductions do not count in the Premier League. So presumably, Sheffield Wednesday would have had a 12-point deduction should they ever get relegated. So it all becomes very, very strange. So I think the timing of this, and Wigan fans are unhappy because they have been given a 12-point deduction for this season. Sheffield Wednesday's is next season. There's a lot of inconsistencies here, although the Wigan rulings do apply automatically upon administration. So, it's murky as always.
Again, it's another indication that we have been married too long, because I was about to ask you to explain for those people, especially overseas listeners, who may be wondering why the Sheffield Wednesday one is deferred and the Wigan one was immediate. But they're a breach of two separate regulations, aren't they? This is kind of illegal, unlawful argument. So Wigan went into administration, and that's an automatic 12-point deduction, and Wednesday breached some rules that isn't automatic but was once the appeal was heard.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And it does seem a bit harsh that Wigan do get penalised immediately when the issues to do with Sheffield Wednesday took place in 2018, and effectively that they're being punished in 2021. So it's to take 3 years for justice to, or whatever the EFL call justice, to take place. But then when you look at QPR and their financial fair play accusations, they got their punishment, and that took 4 years to resolve. And as always, the only winners, our friends in the silver tongue profession. You can imagine Range Rover dealerships are being contacted by various PAs to the silks at present.
Yeah, that is such a typical Brighton thing to say. That's how you judge wealth, isn't it? A new Range Rover. They've also treated themselves to a new Labrador and a new Waitrose account. On the Wigan thing, because we are recording this slightly early, we're having to record this on Saturday because of, as always, your work commitments and the fact that I believe you've got a rather nice restaurant booked this evening. But I was with some Wigan fans on Thursday night, and they were hoping / expecting a decision yesterday on that appeal, but obviously that's not been forthcoming.
Yes, so the appeal took place on the 31st of July. It should be relatively straightforward, but then we've got Barnsley attending the hearing.
Yes, well, we're coming on to that, so let's save that for a little moment, shall we? And pretend that I didn't mention that in the first place. The second news story is a big one, because we only spoke about this last week, because basically no sooner do you accuse FIFA of being gangsters then Swiss prosecutors have launched legal proceedings against FIFA President Gianni Infantino. And my first question, Kieran, is how does it feel to be a grass? Because Uncle Terry will be turning in his grave underneath that flyover. But and so the timing is great, because certain people did, and I appreciate how relevant and influential some people think we are, but I'm guessing the timing was just because it only took 2 days. I doubt if Swiss prosecutors were listening to Price of Football thinking, well, it's not quite as good as Swiss Ramble, but maybe that's because I'm biased. And then suddenly going, I tell you what, we need to bring that Infantino bloke in.
Yeah. So this is a new Swiss Attorney General, and he's launched an investigation into Infantino, who, for people that didn't listen to our most recent pod, had a meeting with the former Swiss Attorney General, where, first of all, they didn't remember the meeting taking place, and secondly, neither of them could remember anything that was discussed at the meeting because nobody took notes, and they're getting on a bit, so therefore they're a bit forgetful. So that did seem a little bit strange. So the investigation is looking at, first of all, is Infantino guilty of abuse of office, breaches of official secrecy, assisting offenders, and clearly if you're dealing with FIFA, there's an awful lot of offenders who have been prosecuted and banned, and giving an incitement to others to break the law. Infantino has responded, these claims are absurd. So we wait to see. And in terms of the mafioso, I was contacted by Christina from Portsmouth University to say, we don't need to worry about this because FIFA are being charged in the US under the RICO legislation, and that's all to do with racketeering. So therefore, it's actually probably appropriate to refer to them as the mafiosa FIFA in future.
You had me slightly worried then when you said that you'd referred to them as mafiosa and you were contacted by Christina. That's I did slightly wonder where that. Although several of your stories have started with you were contacted by Christina, so it could have gone either way. It's an interesting one that the American, I mean, because as well, not as we know about Swiss prosecutors, because they're a secretive bunch. But I think most of us know that the Swiss authorities legendarily don't take action like this lightly. Switzerland is a country where, in the past, it's often been somewhere to lay low or bury your gold. So it's quite significant that the Swiss prosecutors have launched legal proceedings against, let's face it, I mean, this is one of the biggest, the most well-known organisations in the world, essentially, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and perhaps that's why producer Guy's not around this morning, because perhaps he's burying his gold from the show in a Swiss bank account as we speak.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in terms of the Swiss, there could be an element of politics here, given that the Attorney General might be trying to twist the knife in his predecessor. We don't know how political an appointment his role is. But FIFA are based in Switzerland. Infantino is based there. It doesn't reflect particularly well on the organisation or the way it's administering itself. And also, we've seen recently that the Afghanistan football president, he has been banned by FIFA. And that follows allegations of sexually abusing female players. But FIFA apparently initially ignored the protestations, which came from people connected with Afghanistan football. So that doesn't reflect particularly well. It looks like they've got their act together finally, and as usual, they've come out with a long-winded explanation as to why it's taken them so long to deal with this pretty horrendous issue.
Yeah, it might be nice if they come out with an explanation as well as to why there are no female officials registered for the World Cup when everyone was expecting Charles Massey-Lloyd, who is arguably the best assistant referee in the country, to be on that list, at least from a PR point of view. But no, of course not, because the World Cup's in Qatar and that sort of thing can't be sanctioned. So this is all grist to the mill of the FIFA special that we promised, and we had a lot of response to that, Kieran, when we said, when you first raised the mafiosa thing, we said, look, we need to do a full pod on this, and people around the world agree with us. So that's something we are putting together. Now, closer to home, but again, something you predicted more recently, Mike Ashley seems to be in complete denial about this. He's got his fingers in his ears whistling, saying, no, it's still happening. But it seems to everybody else that the Saudi takeover of Newcastle has collapsed. Is that one reason, Kieran, or many?
Well, the press release, and again, you've got to take these things with a large dose of salt, was said that they were disappointed with the delays and also the continuing uncertainty to do with COVID-19 has made their decision that they're going to pull out of the deal. Amanda Staveley is said to be heartbroken as a result of this. I think the issues are actually to do with the owners and directors test. The Premier League has spent 17 weeks trying to decide whether or not they want the PIF to be appropriate owners. People will be making links towards human rights issues, but we already have a Saudi owner at Sheffield United. We've got Russian owners, Chinese owners, Thai owners, USA owners, so UAE owners. So to separate out one country does seem harsh, I think it's fair to say. There's also, I was reading some articles that pressure was put on the Premier League from some of the clubs themselves who don't like the idea of the Big Six potentially becoming a Big Seven, because that will increase competition, and some of the clubs at the top don't want competition. And I suspect there could be, if we drew a Venn diagram, there could be a big overlap between those clubs that have been muttering things to the Premier League that a Saudi takeover isn't in the best interest of football, with the clubs who are now known as the Nasty Nine, who wrote to UEFA and CAS to say that Manchester City's appeal shouldn't go ahead. So there's a lot of politics in Premier League football, and this appears to be connected to that as well, sadly.
Well, I wouldn't have thought it would just be the top 4 or 5 teams that were against Newcastle becoming multi-billionaires, because clubs like Palace and Brighton, at the start of each season, you look around and see, first of all, can we finish above the 3 that have been promoted? And then you look at clubs like Newcastle, who you would expect to be in and around us. So, I shouldn't think Steve Parish would be particularly pleased to see Newcastle being taken out of that little mid-table clutch either. Now, our next story, if I'd been thinking more clearly, and if it hadn't been the morning, which is now when people who like to play Cluedo could work out from the clues we give when we're actually recording this. But Barnsley, this is going to come as no surprise, this story, is it? Barnsley, the team that would be relegated if Wigan lose their appeal against their 12-point deduction, were invited to make their views known to the Commission holding that appeal. That's Barnsley, the team that would be relegated. And I apologise, by the way, if you can hear a strange buzzing sound in the background. It's not a wasp. It's the bloke 2 doors down, obviously had a birthday recently in which somebody bought him a sander, because he's been out, literally, as soon as it's daylight, he's out sanding something. He's going to be sanding my house soon. But there's nothing I can do about it, because he's quite a big fella, and I don't speak a lot of Polish. I know dziękuję, which is thank you. I like the Polish shop got me through lockdown, so I know a couple of words. I also know the look on Polish women's face when which says, "Oh, it's that idiot again," the one who points and goes, "Yeah, that one." But Barnsley being allowed to have their say to the appeal committee about Wigan's potential 12-point deduction seemed to me to be slightly unfair, because we know exactly what Barnsley think about it. Some Barnsley fans are probably the only people that are not rooting for Wigan here. So is that normal practice, Kieran? Because they've got a lot of riding on it financially, haven't they?
Yeah, it's the first time I've heard of this. Barnsley did put out a very strongly worded statement at the end of the season, which didn't make any reference to Wigan, but did make a lot of references to the overall governance of the Football League, and then made some specific references to the behaviour of other clubs. So clearly they're unhappy. Whilst you can fully understand them being completely hacked off with Wigan having a hearing, I'm not quite sure on what grounds they're entitled to address the committee, because this hasn't happened before. They are a third party. And surely the case should be that of the EFL to say, well, these are the rules, we've applied the rules are unequivocal, and then Wigan's defence, which by all accounts is based on force majeure, to be then considered by the 3 people on the panel. So to get a third party involved is unprecedented, in my opinion.
Yeah, also we don't know what Barnsley say or have said. I mean, it might well be that Barnsley say, no, it's very unfair that we're going to be deducted 12 points. But if I was a Barnsley fan, I'd be slightly worried, because this is a situation that could happen to any club. outside the top six in the Premier League, as we know, Kieran, even it only takes your owner or our owners to have some financial problems, and this could happen to all of us. You want to store up as much sympathy as you possibly can. You don't want to be going around having the reputation as the team that wanted to see another team get a 12-point deduction. But again, until we find out what Barnsley actually said and the outcome of this, I think we should probably move on from that, because we still have 129 news items left before we get to some. We've got some very good questions. Now, oddly enough, this is something else that we spoke about last week, and I'm not suggesting the universe is doing this deliberately, but we talked about data gathering on players for computer games, essentially, and how some football clubs at a very high level have tried to access the data banks of computer games, because they research all over the world. And now we find out in the last couple of days that hundreds, literally, of current and former players are planning to sue bookmakers and data gatherers to try and gain royalties for the use of their personal statistics. Now, that seems to me another one for our silver-tongued friends, but personal statistics surely are a matter of public record, aren't they? I would have thought.
Well, I don't think they are. It's a bit like my medical records being, if I go to the doctor.
Kieran, this podcast is already long enough as it is without having to go into those. Oh, medical records. It's fine. It's just your general medical records. We probably
there's no mention of penicillin yet. This was a story. This originally broke from David Ornstein in the Athletic, and it appears to be a class action from players not just presently playing football, but historically playing football. There's a statute of limitations here of 6 years. And this is the gaming industry, the gambling industry, but also the likes of Opta and the others that put out lots of statistical-based information, and they sell that to clients. They actually sell that to clubs.
Oh, right, I see, yeah.
So who owns the data, in terms of a player's speed, height, weight, the number of headers that he wins per match, the number of tackles made successfully? Does this fall within the overall remit of image rights, and therefore the intellectual property to those belongs to the player? And if that's the case, we will be dealing with money which is owed to the players. So this is being coordinated by Russell Sallard, the former Leyton Orient manager. He's managed many clubs. So he's gathering this on behalf of players. And he says, this could be a huge game changer especially for players in lower leagues who are on shorter careers, on much lower pay. So I think he's hoping for support from this, from the players in the Premier League as well.
See, life was simpler in our day. You simply wouldn't get a player suing top trumps, would you? I'm not 6'2", tallest player. That's how simple life was. 6 foot, tallest player, quickest one. But it's interesting though, because like you say, intellectual rights is one of those ways that clubs bump up, or intellectual ownership, rather, I suppose, is one of the ways that clubs bump up a player's salary and wages as well. So it probably does need looking at.
Yeah, and by all accounts, we're talking hundreds of millions of pounds in terms of the total value of the action, of which I suspect a large proportion will go to non-footballers.
Right. Okay. Nearly there. Adam Miller is just one of many people who've asked us about this. Basically, will it happen? The EFL plans for a salary cap are set to be put to the vote this week.
Yes, so there's an EFL meeting, presumably online, on the 6th of August. The news which has leaked out, and club owners and directors are quite good at leaking out information, is that in the Championship it's going to be a £16 million limit, £2.5 million in League One, £1.5 million in League Two. But this is only going to apply to players who are only over 21. So it wouldn't apply to academy players. And there's supposed to be issues in respect of existing contracts. And I think sort of linking to if we look at this as an overall topic, Pompey's Mark Catlin has said this could lead to a sort of a bit of a trolley dash for players, because if you've got an existing contract, it won't effectively be caught within these limits. So if the deal is, or rather, if the vote is taking place on the 6th of August, it could be that many Championship, League One and League Two teams will try to get contracts signed by players if they're going to be slightly more generous before the 6th of August, and therefore that would be excluded from these particular rules. So that does make things even more complicated. But what's going to happen to clubs that are being relegated? Because if we take a look at Bournemouth, for example, their wage bill last season was 111 million. Now, by all means, you'd expect players, or some players, to have relegation clauses, but to get from 111 to 16 is going to be tough. Sunderland last season in League One had a £27 million wage bill. How can they get that down to 2.5? So it's going to be a genuine challenge. By the looks of things, under EFL rules, I think now you need a 2/3 majority to do the votes, and it looks like it could be done on a divisional basis. So that now means, because the season has ended, Wigan, Charlton and Hull, or it could be Barnsley, for all we know, they will be doing the League One votes. And it does get very messy, because if you think about, if this is going to be an annual issue, 6 or 7 teams change in every division every season. So what could be desirable for the club owners in 2020, they might decide to reverse that in 2021. And how do you get any sustainability, and how do you get any long-term strategy at the club in terms of player recruitment if this is going to be an annual vote, which could be changed simply because clubs change division? By all accounts, it's going to be pretty close as to whether or not it will be successful. If you take a look at League One, we've got big clubs there. We've got Sunderland, we've got Ipswich, we've got Pompey, Charlton, Wigan and Hull coming down. Are they going to be keen to vote for that? I think it'll be on a knife edge as to which way it's going to go.
If it's a divisional vote, Kieran, does that imply then that you could end up with a situation where the Championship has no salary cap, but League Two does?
Correct. Yes, and that's what we actually have at present.
Right.
The financial fair play rules in the Championship are profit-based, but there is a form of a league cap, so a wage cap, in both Leagues 1 and 2 at present. I think the aim of the proposals is to make it a harsher cap. At present, in League 1, broadly, you can't spend more than 60% of your income on wages, and broadly in League 2, it's 50%, but there are small print adjustments to that, of course.
Okay, well, controversially, let's come back to our last news story in a minute, because our first question is actually a very specific one and a very interesting one about that salary cap. It comes from Mike Bailey. Basically, what Mike says, would a League One and League Two cap simply shift the problem elsewhere, i.e., instead of massive wages, clubs offer massive transfer and signing on fees to attack the best players, or would signing on fees be included in the salary cap?
Yes, signing on fees, bonuses are all included in the cap. Okay. But I think Mike's absolutely right to identify that the problem could be shifted. Our favourite story in relation to football shenanigans involves a club paying a player's mother as an academy scout.
Oh, well, welcome back to that, old friend.
But given that the salary cap is going to apply to over 21-year-old players only, can you see that clubs now have an incentive to get the player's partner, the mum, the dad, or whatever it's going to be, give them a no-show job? The type of jobs that I'm watching. I'm watching a documentary series on Netflix at present, which is all about the mafia in the 70s, and a lot of the time they were just given no-show jobs. They were paid a salary. This type of thing does take place in football. I know one or two footballers who themselves they get a salary from the club, and they are also a part-time employee of the owner's other business. Now, this is another way, of course, of just shifting stuff around. It's it's going to be messy, as these things always tend to be. That's there is no easy solution. I mean, the EFL take a lot of stick, but they really do have, unless club owners buy into the ethos of we're doing this for the right thing, for the right reasons, for the long-term future of the clubs. Unless all club owners buy into that, it's almost impossible to police.
Okay, well, for new listeners to the pod, the club in question was Derby County, and the player was Tom Ince. I don't know. I don't know Tom Ince's mother's first name. I was going to say Mrs., but that would sound wrong.
I think it's Claire.
Clarence. Well, there you go. Yeah. Good. The only reason I want to include this last story is because it's slightly different, and it's American club. We always like to keep our American listeners happy. Detroit City FC is selling a chunk of the club to its fans, including its biggest fan, Iggy Pop, in a bid to raise $1.2 million to keep them going. That's no fun, is it? And that was literally the only Iggy Pop song that worked. Seriously, the Rolodex was going for 5 minutes last night, thinking there's got to be an Iggy Pop song that works in a football finance situation somehow, but Iggy's let me down, basically. So it's an interesting one, this, Kieran, because, again, Detroit City trying to raise $1.2 million. Our perception is that American soccer is rolling in money the same way that American sport is, but that doesn't seem a lot of money to me to keep an American soccer club viable, Kieran.
No, but when you delve into it, Detroit City they're not part of the MLS. They're part of the National Independent Soccer Association, which is the sort of the equivalent of a third division. There's only 8 teams in it, and it's there's quite a few Rust Belt clubs in it. So they're big. They're big rivals by all accounts of Cleveland, and it gets a bit lively here. They shout abuse at each other in smiley faces and things like that. But Iggy Pop is a fan, and the aim here is to effectively sell off 10% of the club. The shares are going to cost $125 each. The money is going to go to stadium improvements, staff wages in front office, and coronavirus costs. And this is actually this is following on from a similar approach taken by Chattanooga FC, who are again sort of these clubs tend to be more community based. So if you take a look at Detroit City. I saw a lot of parallels there with St. Pauli. They have an annual match where they give all the proceeds are given to a local charity. Iggy Pop, is a fan. He has said he's buying shares, and if you go onto YouTube, you've got Iggy Pop's voice doing the voiceover for the campaign. And Iggy Pop has one of the greatest voices on the planet, in my view. So he's growling his way through it, and it's very evocative. $125 if you are a Detroit City fan, or you're just an Iggy Pop fan and you want to share in something which he's passionate about.
Yes, 2 issues there. I do hope that Chattanooga have a restaurant at their stadium called the Choo Choo. I'm on fire this morning. And do you know what? Somebody at home might be able to enlighten me on this, because Kieran, a guy puts Detroit City is. I never know when it comes to a football club whether you say Crystal Palace are or Crystal Palace is. I'm not entirely sure the rules on that, and I know about grammar normally. So if anybody could enlighten me on that, that would be lovely. Try direct messaging so it doesn't make us look dull on Twitter. Finally, sorry, yeah. Us, well, I'd say us look dull. I'd seriously, Kieran, I can't wait for the football season to kick off so we can get some proper news stories to get our teeth into. But finally, 32 minutes and 55 seconds into the pod, that timer you put up on this is great, Kieran, by the way. Our second question comes from Andrew Broderick. For new listeners, by the way, this Monday pod is normally just based on questions, but we had so much news to get through this week that we couldn't wait for the news pod on Thursday. And who knows, we might even ask some questions on Thursday. It's the summer. It's madness. But Andrew Broderick is a Bournemouth fan. Sorry about that at the moment, Andrew. And he says, none of us Bournemouth fans expected Ryan Fraser to sign a short-term contract. As a free agent, will he get a better contract as a result of COVID-19, or will even free agents see wage offers lowered in the current situation? Now, one of the reasons I'm interested in this is that Palace are one of the clubs that the tabloids all seem to have down as being interested in. I can't see that because he's only in his 20s. He's not a defensive midfielder, so he doesn't tick any of Roy Hodgson's boxes. But as a free agent, is he? Because I mean, that was the big story going into or coming out of lockdown, was that Ryan Fraser didn't want to sign that short-term contract to play for them in the last 11 games of the season.
Yes, I thought it was an interesting one, this one. I got in contact with one of our agent friends, and they said he's likely to benefit from this because he has been a Premier League regular. He's only 26. The average wages at Bournemouth are 53 grand a week. In the Premier League. Now, if he goes to a club such as Arsenal, then he's set for a big payday, because they pay good wages. If he goes to Palace's wages are broadly similar to those of Bournemouth, so he could get a decent deal, because what Palace would be doing, or any other recruitment club, they will be looking at the total cost to them. He's likely to be offered, a 4-year contract if he's 26. So they look at the total cost, and the total cost is transfer fee plus wages over 4 years. Now, you take out the transfer fee out of the equation, and that automatically means that the wages potentially on offer are going to be higher. I think if he was more of a fringe player, he'd probably have to accept whatever the bidding club offered. But he's got the advantage that there's likely to be more than one club interested in his services. So therefore, I think he's probably got that. It tips the balance in terms of negotiations, and could benefit from this financially.
Well, given what you told us a couple of questions ago about no-shows, we could put him down as Steve Parish's gardener as well. That would help.
Yes. Or hairdresser.
No, you'd have to show up for that, wouldn't he? Stuart Hatcher is a Brentford fan. So Stuart would probably be very excited about him, but I suspect maybe not, because Stuart Hatcher, Brentford fan, has asked a proper curmudgeonly football fan question. Seriously, Stuart, well done. I really, it made me smile a lot, this question, because it probably reflects the average mentality of most football fans. Unless you support Man City or Liverpool, this is a question you'll probably nod your head at. And Stuart says, back in the day when we were always in the third division, we always said we don't want to get promotion anyway because it would cost too much. Wage increases, transfer fees, policing, stewarding, etc. Which is one of those things that every single club. I mean, there must at least 3 occasions when Palace fans said, "Well, Ron Nose doesn't want us to go up. That's why we keep finishing 7th." And so, but Stuart says, "Is it actually better for some clubs not to go up? Is it true that you can't afford to go up? Is it better to go down than get promoted?" Rather than just staying up. And I guess if you'd rather be a Villa fan than a Norwich one at the moment. But does Stuart have a curmudgeonly point?
Sometimes it is beneficial to be promoted, not spend the benefits of promotion, have an air shot in the higher division, and then go down, and you're actually a lot better off financially.
Well, that's what Norwich fans have pretty much accused the club of doing that, because there was, sorry to interrupt, there was much more anger amongst Norwich fans on social media and on phone-ins, and I know they weed out the calm, gentle Norwich fans on phone-ins, because that's the last thing you want is somebody saying to Robbie Savage, "No, I think we did the right thing." But it's the Norwich fans were quite upset at the thought that they spent very little money and didn't seem to really give it a proper go. So what you say now could be reassuring to them.
Yes, I mean, Burnley did it. I mean, Burnley have been promoted 2 or 3 times, and it was very noticeable. The first couple of times they got promoted, they said, well, you've done well to get us up. We're going to give you the opportunity to play in the Premier League. That's the official version. The unofficial version is don't want to spend a lot more on wages. We want to improve the infrastructure to if we do go down, we're actually going to be in a very strong position to then have a longer period of tenure in the Premier League. So that worked for Burnley. We've seen Norwich's approach. Blackpool went up and didn't spend any money, and although there were huge issues to do with Blackpool and the Oystons, who are they're in my scumbag top 10 of all time list. Remember, the following season they got to the playoffs. So when they dropped down into the Championship, so this can work to a degree. As a fan, I don't worry about the wage increases because I'm not paying the wages.
Right.
So that bit it's never particularly bothered me. Ultimately, it's the club's decision or the club owner's decision. But costs do go up when you rise. If you take a look at Brentford, in the seasons since they've been promoted from League One to the Championship, they've lost 105 million. That's a huge sum of money. They've had player sales. Their development model, which we've spoken on a few occasions, has helped to reduce those losses. But the owner has had to go and stick his hand in the pocket to subsidise the rest. But we could be talking at 10 o'clock Tuesday night after the playoff final, and I think this question won't be top of the list of Brentford fans' concerns.
Yeah, fair enough. James Cotter, and I'm pleased with these questions because they come from individual fans concerned about their club, which is great. James Cotter is a Birmingham City fan. That's a place I always liked visiting as an away fan and as a pundit, I have to say. But James says that Birmingham fans live with the constant realisation that at some stage they will fall foul of FFP rules. And again, along with Sheffield Wednesday and Derby, Birmingham's name does come up a lot on this pod. But James wants to know how that can be the case when for several seasons they are so obviously a selling club and not a buying club.
Well, this is linked to owner ambitions. They did have a guy called Carson Young in charge of them, who turned out to be a hairdresser who got done for money laundering in Hong Kong. So it is a fascinating backstory. But what we have seen, I think, consistently at Birmingham, is a willingness to overspend. If you take a look at the 4 years between 2016 to 2019. They had total income of £74 million, total wages of 109. So again, that's before you throw your transfers in.
Yeah.
I've been into their transfer details, and I know what James is saying now because they've just sold Jude Bellingham at a fantastic price, and he's a very exciting prospect. But remember, 3 or 4 years ago, they had Harry Redknapp as manager. They had Gianfranco Zola as manager. And the club owners, I'm not saying they did anything wrong, were perhaps a little bit starry-eyed, and they just gave them effectively a blank checkbook.
Yeah.
So Birmingham historically have been spending reasonable sums on players. And I think it's only in the last sort of 12 to 18 months that trend has reversed. And because it has reversed, I think from Birmingham's point of view, they're probably less likely now to be on the financial fair play worry list. But given their form towards the end of the season, that's the problem. If you do sell players, you end up with the type of run that they had at the end of 2019-20. And fans were, I've seen some of the pictures and seen some of the comments, and they're not happy with the owners, they're not happy with the manager, they're not happy with quite a few of the players as well.
Yeah, and of course, managers like Harry Redknapp, also, Sam Allardyce, Tony Pulis, that generation tend to bring in older players, more experienced Premier League players who come with big wage bills and quite often no relegation clauses either. So that was another issue for Birmingham, wasn't it? That they were landed with an historically large wage bill in the division below the one they couldn't stay in.
That's right, and they've had some famous ones with the likes of Nikola Zigic when they were in the Premier League. He didn't have a relegation clause. I think they had 1 season with him in the Premier League and then 3 seasons with him wandering around fairly relaxed whenever I used to see him play on 50 or 60 grand a week in the Championship.
Yeah. Now, I was optimistic, Kieran, that we could still, even with all the news stories and even with all the questions, that we could maybe still bring this pod in at under an hour. But then Alistair Lunn asked this question, and it's our first ever question about trees. I did a proper Tom and Jerry double take, wiping my eyes when I first saw this question. But and again, my cursory research shows it to be true. It's up there. You've got your list of top 10 scumbags. I've got my list of top 10 questions, and this is knocking on the door. Alistair Lunn. And this, for those of you who don't know this story, again, a lot of our overseas listeners may not know this story. A lot of our home-based listeners may not know it, to be perfectly honest. Hector Bellerin offered to buy 3,000 trees every time Arsenal win, which is a lovely gesture for the planet. And Paddy Power, as is their way, kind of trolled him by offering to buy 6,000 trees every time they lost. Now, Alistair, who I suspect has a bit of the curmudgeon in him, like our Brentford supporter earlier. He wants to know where the Premier League and the FA stand on this, because he says it's a genuine offer, but quite rightly points out that Hector Bellerin does stand to be actually financially better off if Arsenal lose, because he's not having to fork out for 3,000 trees. Now, Alistair says, is there a rule? And then says, because I can't separate the wood from the trees. And then in brackets puts sorry. Now, Alistair, never apologise for a bad joke, mate. Style out the bad jokes. Take it from me. I've been doing that for a while. You can get away with it quite often. It's a great question, Kieran, but I live in South London. I've got no idea what trees cost. But, I mean, you're surrounded by the buggers, but they haven't got price tags on. I mean, I don't know what sort of money is involved here, but it does have a genuine point. Hector Bellerin will be better off if Arsenal lose, and I should think the FA and the Premier League wouldn't be particularly happy about that.
Well, he will be better off, but will he? Because his contract, of course, will have win bonuses. So it could be that all he's doing, he's paying out from his win bonuses to buy these trees. But I think the issue that Alistair raises is an interesting
one. That was a sentence you never thought you'd hear yourself say as a football finance expert. He's using his win bonus to buy these trees. We don't even know what sort of trees they are or where he's going to plant them. He's not going to be planting them. He's not going to be like Johnny Appleseed, is he? Wandering over North London, scattering seeds. Well, sorry, that's going to bring back some memories for you, isn't it? I'm sorry about that, Kieran.
We're back to Moscow again, aren't we? But Hector Bellerin is a fascinating footballer because he's gone big. He's concerned about the sustainability of the planet. He's a vegan. He's doing this, that, and the other. Very green player indeed. It does raise an issue of, are there conflicts of interest within football? For me, this comes under the charity banner, which and there are many players. Certainly, when remember at the start of COVID-19, we had players saying for goalkeepers, for every shot I save, I'm going to give $1,000 to this or to this campaign. Yeah. We've seen other players saying, if I score a goal, I'm giving. We've got Harry Kane sponsoring Leyton Orient next season. So it does come within, in my view, within the remit of charity. But now that Paddy Power, in their infinite wisdom, have decided to get involved, it does make you feel slightly less comfortable about the issue. And I think it comes back to, if it was deemed to be gambling, then the FA rules and the Premier League rules would kick in, because there have been a number of players and owners and indeed managers who have been charged historically with gambling-related offences. Partly this is to do with insider information, and partly to do with the fact that there is huge conflicts of interest. If you own a football club, you shouldn't be involved with gambling yourself. And those owners, and that affects Brighton as well. We have an owner who is involved with the gambling industry, as do Stoke, as do Brentford. Because people who gamble are often football fans, and trying to make sure that there are clear lines of distinction is something which has to be established. And to date, all those clubs have managed to do that.
Yeah, I still don't know how much 3,000 trees cost. I mean, there was a legendary story about Barry Fry when he was at Peterborough, which is quoted in numerous sources. I think it's in his own autobiography, where he was rather heavily fined by the FA for gambling on one of his players to become top scorer in the league that year, which the player did. Luckily, Barry Fry won enough on the bet to pay off the fine, basically, which is one of those great Barry Fry stories. But then because you laugh at it and you go, well, that's not really right, is it? But and now Guy, if he's listening to this, will have woken up and he's been frantically flicking through the books to make sure that is a true story, because it's him that gets sued.
There's also stories of players themselves before the FA tightened up the rules. There would be things like first throw-in, first corner, and therefore I remember. One player said, our plan was that we'd put on a bet ourselves, and from the kickoff, we deliberately kicked the ball out of play so that the opposition won the first throw-in bet.
That Bellerin story is quite interesting. Again, if you could direct message rather than make it look... Because sometimes people look at my Twitter feed will be going, hang on now, he wants to know whether a football club is or are, and now he's asked how much trees are costing. Leo Hernig, I hope I pronounced that right, Leo. Leo Hernig has a more simple question, but it's actually a very pertinent one. Now, some clubs had to take players off furlough to take part in the EFL playoffs. Will they have been allowed to put them back onto furlough if they lost those playoffs?
Yes, I've been into the furlough regulations, and furlough, you're allowed to rotate in terms of furlough. So therefore, you can take individual members of staff on and off. You can have, say, and also you can change the people who are affected by furlough. So you could have 10 players do a week or a month on furlough, and then another 10, and things of that nature. So there is flexibility within the scheme, but my concern is that the scheme is tapering off. So in September, the employers have to pay more of the wages, or have got to pay 10% of the wages. The scheme is deemed to be finished by the end of October, and if football matches are taking place in behind closed doors, then my fears for the lower leagues are going to multiply, because no money coming in and money having to go out because the clubs are now having to pay the wages. That's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, well, it might also explain why the government was so keen yesterday when they announced the pausing of pilot schemes this weekend at Goodwood and at certain cricket games, that they were still very much aiming to get people back into football grounds by the 1st of October, because I'm sure they're aware of these sort of things. The last question, Kieran, comes from Mark Ridley. Now, I have to admit that we are recording this slightly before the FA Cup final this evening, as we said. So if I wake up tomorrow morning and see 3,000 extra trees on Streatham Common, I'll know that Arsenal have won the FA Cup, and congratulations. But Mark's, again, this is it's one of those simple questions that makes you wonder why I hadn't thought of it, or you hadn't thought of it. Mark Ridley's question is quite, so how much will the FA have lost hosting the FA Cup semi-finals and final in an empty stadium? Now, it's interesting because a lot of mates have been saying this to me and having this, that in the circumstances, why play them at Wembley in the first place? And I know the players and the clubs involved would love to have played them at Wembley, but this was a situation, surely, when you could have played them at a more local ground and a smaller ground as well, and saved yourself a bit of money.
I guess the FA just take the view that, given that they own Wembley, they're not having to pay a rental fee for the ground, whereas they might have to do that if it was being held at Villa Park or elsewhere in London and so on. So that's their rationale. And also, the FA are trying to send out a very strong signal. It's business as usual within football, and this is a tradition. Clearly, we won't be having the it's a knockout on Cup final day, which I used to love when I was a kid, between the two clubs and things of that nature. But they are trying to showcase this, and also from a TV rights point of view, it could be that the contracts that they have with broadcasters is that the match has to take place at Wembley because that's what the broadcasters have paid for. So they might have to give them an increased rebate. In terms of the costs, I went into the FA accounts in detail and broke them down. It's probably going to be, it probably cost them around about £4 million for each of the semi-finals, and probably in the region of $5 million for the final, which is going to be, is significant. And the FA has announced job losses. It has announced pay cuts for senior executives. It's certainly trying to cut back on the way that it spends money. The FA will have been hit far, far harsher by the cancellation of Euro 2020 this summer, because, as I mentioned to you, I had some tickets for Wembley to see England, and they was about 170 quid a throw.
Yeah, you have mentioned it, Kieran. Yeah, it's come up occasionally, less so on the pod than in the bits before and after the pod. But yes, it's been mentioned. Well, I just like the idea that now not only is Guy googling Barry Fry gambling autobiography, but young people all over the world are googling "It's a knockout FA Cup final day." It's interesting though, because I think there are still a lot of people, even people who have listened to this pod every week, that are still quite surprised that the FA make money out of their own tournaments. It took a long time for that idea to sink into me, because you kind of grow up thinking of the FA as a benevolent umbrella organisation and not somebody who needs to make money out of the stadium that cost them a shed load of money in the first place.
Oh, they rent out parts of it. There's a UFCB, a university college there, which I've given talks to, and the catering facilities, which again were very lucrative on non-match days. It's a horrible nerdy management phrase, but they've got to sweat their assets. They've got to make them more valuable than the sort of the 50 days of activity in terms of football, NFL, concerts, and so on that they presently have it open for.
Well, I noticed actually a lot of clubs, Palace included, are being quite imaginative now, using the space at the grounds, because you can have restaurants can open, the catering facilities are open, they're taking bookings for Christmas in a safe way. There are parties of 10, 20, 30, but also they had in the car park they had an outdoor cinema restaurant experience. So that's one thing at least where clubs, because every club, even the smallest club in League Two, will have catering facilities. So there was one thing at least that there's some income will start to come in from having outsiders in for tiny wedding receptions or small functions. So that's some ticking over going on, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think clubs will become more and more imaginative, and they've got to, because without us punters turning up, in the Premier League the clubs are. We've said this on more than one occasion that the Premier League clubs are protected to a degree.
Yeah.
But once you drop down the divisions, we are the bread and butter of club survival.
We are. No, it's been an interesting pod, questions stroke news pod. Stroke trees. This will go down in history. This is the one when BAFTA does have a podcast section. This will be the clip they play, because we've got to be nominated in Best Football Finance podcast category. Surely, the Swiss Ramble won't bother coming over, so I think we'll win it by default essentially. So we'll get the speech ready, but that'll be the clip they play, the Hector Bellerin trees. So I look forward to a camera shot of Joanna Lumley looking puzzled for that bit. Kieran, it's been a pleasure. Enjoy your meal tonight. Enjoy the cup final, and I will see you for our usual news pod, which probably will be full of questions, but I imagine Wigan will be talked about in that, and hopefully we'll have the result of the EFL salary cap, so we'll have plenty to talk about. If you do have questions for us, and again, we do, your questions are our bread and butter, if you like. They're more than our bread and butter. They're our bread and butter with posh jam on them. I was trying to think of a posh shop, yeah. I was trying to think of a
conserve.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a posh fruit. That's terrible. I couldn't think of a posh fruit. Blueberries? Is that a posh fruit? How many blueberries is Hector Bellerin? Never mind. Questions at priceoffootball.com. We do have questions that haven't been asked yet, and I know every week people tweet and say they're disappointed that their question hasn't been chosen. It's partly because we get so many questions, which is wonderful, but also because sometimes people ask versions of the same question. So it's not a personal, and it might be that we will get to your question, but sometimes it's just that the salary cap, for example, a lot of people asked us about that. So we just pick out a couple that, Guy picks out the first two on the top of the list, basically. But we will get to your questions eventually, but please keep sending them in. And don't worry how broad it is or how specific. Kieran will find a way of answering it for you. So we'll see you next time. Until then, Kieran, your message, please.
Well, before that, I'd just like to have a big shout out to my Uncle Tony. He's had COVID-19. He's presently in a coma. He took me to my first ever football match when I was 8 years old. So, big love to Uncle Tone, and I'm rooting for him.
Oh, well, we all are, and that's Uncle Tony, who doesn't live far from me, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, big West Ham fan, but he ended up going to Palace in recent years as well.
Well, it happens to everybody in the end. But, we send obviously love to Uncle Tony, and we hope for better news from him. Until then, Kieran, your message for everybody else is?
Stay safe, boys and girls.
The price of football. The price of football.